as one of the leading cybersecurity experts in the world, if all signs point to the Russians as the source, I can promise you it is not the Russians. And here is why. Anyone capable of carrying out such a hack is certainly capable of hiding their tracks. It's 10 times easier to make a hack look like it came from somewhere else than it is to do the hack itself. So clearly, I mean, the Russians are smart enough not to leave Russian language in their code or to have IP addresses that end up somewhere in Russia. No, those things were planted there by whoever did it.
Adam Kokesh, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's unfortunate under this sort of difficult circumstance, but I'm always grateful for the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Yeah, thank you for being back on. Again, I really did want to speak with you today about John McAfee. He was found dead in a prison cell last week under very bizarre circumstances, and I know that you're a friend of his. When did you first meet John McAfee?
The first time I met him was at the Nevada Libertarian Party convention, presidential primary debate for the LP when he was running in 2016. And it was, I feel like I kind of met him before that, just being such a significant public figure as he had been as McAfee antivirus, but also then, you know, with everything he had done since then. And when he announced that he was running, I mean, I'll start with like a story. This is like my real first sort of interaction with John McAfee was so cool because it was when he was first running for the nomination in 2016, and I was just a Libertarian Party member, activist, candidate, etc., looking at him as another candidate that I could support or not for the presidential nomination. He was talking about all this cybersecurity stuff. Oh, he was going to be the best cybersecurity president. And I was like, yeah, I get it. You're smarter than everybody else, and you're a libertarian on a lot of things. But if you're saying you want government to do cybersecurity, that's crazy. And he picked my friend Judd Weiss as his running mate in 2016. And Judd asked me for support, and I pointed it out to him. I was like, you know what? I love McAfee. I love the way he communicates. I love what he represents. I love his spirit. I love his resume as a pioneer and before McAfee sold the company, it wasn't such a pain in the ass. It wasn't like spamware, whatever the fuck you want to call it like it is now. But being a pioneer in the tech space, all of his credentials, I was like, but he's clearly not a voluntarist if he's advocating for these, cybersecurity national policies, and then bragging about how good he'd be as president and overseeing that. And I said, well, why don't you ask him to read my book if he's not? Because Judd was saying, like, well, he's new to the libertarian field of political thought, and so I said, well, then my book would be perfect. Have him read Freedom, and he did, and he endorsed it on so just a simple Facebook post. And you know what? He probably didn't read the whole thing. He probably didn't have to. I mean, there used to be a fine line between genius and insanity until John McAfee came around and snorted it up. But that in the genius, like, he could have read the first chapter of my book and been like, yeah, oh wow, I get, oh wow, and his brain would have just gone off and written the rest of it in his head for him. And he changed his tune in terms of his platform at that point, and dropped anything that was I'm going to run national security, cybersecurity, anything. And it was just an honor to have had that role in being able to influence him myself. And that's why, that's why I endorsed him in 2016. And it wasn't much of a hard pitch between Peterson and Johnson and Perry, although I was most closely aligned with Perry ideologically, I think Perry was right about the most things. He had the least resume. And then like Peterson and Johnson, I both had significant differences on, but I would have been happy to support any of them. But I was really grateful to have had this role in showing John McAfee what true philosophical consistent libertarianism is, as I define it, as ethically as I think is consistent with the Libertarian Party statement of principles, in ways that he obviously did not understand. And it was also great to be helping him into the party and to run a more effective campaign. And all the, like it was an incredible, like, just existential intellectual experience to say, I wrote the book that got John fucking McAfee to the bottom of, if I may at least humbly say so, the political rabbit hole of libertarianism, because he was so much deeper than most libertarians on so many things that elude most of us. Like, people look at me and celebrate, oh, my civil disobedience, because I see this line and I walk up to it and I step over it and I come back and I go, did you get that on camera? John McAfee, for him, there was no line. If you try to point it out to him afterwards, he would right away call you on that bullshit. And I think of the story he tells about, getting arrested for smoking a joint and going back and getting arrested again until he wouldn't get arrested, because that's the kind of guy he was. And that's why they couldn't let him live. He was just too powerful, too much of a threat to the system to let him exist. And I don't know how much you want to get into, the circumstances, legal story, but
could you just speak to that specifically? What was John McAfee being prosecuted for in regards to taxes?
It was just tax evasion. I mean, plain and simple. And it's funny because they try to use that as an excuse, like that he would be suicidal. Like, oh, he was exposed. No, he was fucking proud to not support the warfare state and the police state and the surveillance state and the corporatism and all the other evils of the federal government of the United States. And he was a great promoter of cryptocurrencies. And he really believed in that, not just as a way for a better way to do business, but as a way to free the world from fiat currencies and the evils of the U.S. dollar. So, even later in life, he was that pioneer, but because he wasn't just building this thing of cybersecurity, he was challenging the fundamentals of the system.
To be clear, it wasn't like he was underpaying or he was doing something, kind of devious. He was saying, I am not paying taxes because I do not want to support the warfare state. So he wasn't paying any taxes for that reason, correct?
Well, he also believed, in not just natural law, in that it is a violation of his rights, that taxation is theft, and that it's morally wrong, and that when you allow people to steal on the scale as we allow government to get away with stealing, that it leads to horrific, direct suffering of humans and under the thumb of government in war and the police state. And so he believed, as I do, that he didn't even have a liability. But he was being threatened with prosecution. That's why he left the United States and actually was on the run or in hiding for a significant part of that time. I would hesitate off the top of my head to talk about the exact timing of what and which charges where, but the gist of what he was, the main charge, and there weren't anything like super extraneous to this. But within, like, they could have tried to get him on all sorts of charges with financial bullshit, 3 felonies a day and all that, where, operating unlicensed money transmitting business like that. By the way, the Crypto 6, you want alive people to support the Crypto 6 facing similar persecution for bullshit charges. But when it comes down to the tax evasion, they could have got him on so many other things and other technicalities, and they could have got him locked up and found him and murdered him this way. But the tax evasions, they want to send a message. Pay your fucking taxes or die. Even if you believe that he was killed or he committed suicide, doesn't matter. He committed suicide in jail? He wasn't there by accident. It was because they came after him for not paying taxes, not giving the government what they wanted to steal from him.
So again, I do want to cover the 2020 Libertarian nomination. To be honest with you, I did not follow the 2020 nomination process in the Libertarian Party as close as I would have liked to. I was very focused on the Green Party nomination process, which was overtly corrupt and was full of all kinds of drama. I don't know if you heard about the whole situation with Jesse Ventura wanting to jump in last minute, and he was kind of gaslit out of that. So just to be candid, I did not quite follow exactly what happened in the Libertarian nomination in 2020. And I was hoping that you could.
I will say, if I may, before I forget, I got to share a stage. It was one of the perks of my run, to share a stage with Howie Hawkins, also a Marine Corps veteran and Green Party presidential candidate, who was at the Chicago event hosted by Christina Tobin. So it was pretty cool to have that at least glancing connection with your primary.
Well, yeah. Again, if we had more time, I'd probably fill you in on exactly what happened in the Green Party nomination. It was not as open and democratic as some people may want you to think. But regardless, I would really like you to educate me on what happened in 2020, because I know in 2016.
Hold on, I'm sorry to keep interrupting. I know it's your show, man, but I want, if I may, it's really important also, before I forget, I hope for any Green Party members who are watching to take this as very important perspective and advice, which is that don't be down on yourselves or the party if you are there and participating for the right reasons, because you should not be ashamed of your battle scars. If you don't know what COINTELPRO is, at least read the fucking Wikipedia article for COINTELPRO. It's a great primer on how the FBI in the 60s and 70s infiltrated the anti-war and Black Power movements to render them ineffective and committed assassination by cop. And when you understand that a lot of the fuckery that we experience as third parties is not because of people who are like us and who are there for the right reasons, it's because of infiltrators and saboteurs. And even if you don't want to be as high conspiracy minded as me in this, look, the Democrats and Republicans have annual budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's just the parties, not counting all of the dark money and campaign money and blah, 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 so much other money around the duopoly. You think they're going to defend themselves from any challengers? If I was in the military industrial complex at the point where I was like conscientiously sponsoring both parties to make sure that my weapons kept getting bought, and I was giving them millions and millions of dollars, I would be disappointed if they were not using some of that money to sabotage the Greens and the Libertarians. So I say this to you as I would say to Libertarians: let's be proud of our scars, not ashamed of them. And I don't know if that's it in the Green Party, but we've experienced things in the LP where you go, that's not organic, and I think we all need to maintain at least whatever is our own well thought out researched version of that awareness.
Well, certainly there's a lot of resources out there. There's a Nation article that I think everybody should read called George Soros's Long Strange Trip, where they talk about him giving over $100,000 to Kevin Zeese, which is, I think, relevant in terms of analyzing what happened to the Green Party over recent years. But again, I really wanted you to educate me on what happened in 2020 with the Libertarian Party, again, just because I didn't follow it. And I think what's odd for me is that I know in 2016, I know that Gary Johnson was running again. He was the 2012 nominee for the Libertarian Party. So it kind of made sense to me, although it may not have agreed, where they went with Gary Johnson in 2016 over John McAfee. But in 2020, Gary Johnson wasn't running. John McAfee is this household name. You had several other lively candidates, and the Libertarian nominee at the end of the day was somebody who nobody had ever heard of before. So again, I'm just wondering if you could kind of walk me through what the story was in 2020, what happened. Do you think that there was sort of top-down influence? I know that there's been sort of ongoing frictions within the Libertarian Party between Nick Sarwark and the Ron Paul faction, and maybe some other factions. And just again, briefly, could you kind of describe what happened in nominating a candidate for the Libertarian Party in 2020?
No. Any such attempt to summarize the general narrative or speculate as to what was happening behind the scenes would be baldly self-serving of me. So I'm going to decline to try to do that. If you want to maybe ask more specific questions, but yeah, I when I say we saw enough squirrely shit, I will say a lot of that was around the chair at the time, Nick Sarwark. If you see what he's done since then, it's very suspect. And the manipulations around the virtual convention and the shutdowns around COVID certainly played a role in that. But yeah, that's as far as I'll go, unless you want to ask more specific questions without sounding too self-serving. But yes, I will say I was grateful, and I said it from the beginning when it was me versus Bill Weld, that if the result of my campaign is just that we nominate someone like Jacob Hornberger instead of someone like Bill Weld, I will have considered it worth my while. But and I would have said the same about Jo Jorgensen. But given that she was not a full-time candidate, did not have a resume, or besides having been the VP nominee 20 years prior and done a great job at that. And personally, I love Jo. I think she's great. I like her message. I think she represents a voluntary, ethical version of libertarianism, and I was happy to support her. But there was a lot of manipulation that ended up with her getting the victory, and it didn't seem very much connected to her. So yeah, I think those statements are kind of irrefutable.
So I guess just the first part of this, in regards to John specifically, was he considered an official candidate? Because that was another whole issue in the Green Party nomination process, where they have something called the PCSC, which determines who's an official Green Party candidate and who's not an official candidate. And, state parties even have some leeway there, where in North Carolina, for example, Howie Hawkins was the only candidate on the ballot in the Green Party primary in 2020. So what was the case with John and the Libertarian Party? Was he considered an official candidate? Did he get delegates, or just was he disqualified because he wasn't in the country or anything like that?
I think it was more on him and strategy and messaging than with the LP. As far as I recall, except for the sort of typical bickering factional silliness, I think the LP was generally accepting of him as a candidate. It was just, well, he's not here, so he's not. But he participated online, he did interviews, but also at one point he was running independent, and I was really disappointed because I wanted him to run LP straight through. I think because as long as the LP has the statement of principles as its grounding, and it's a pretty low bar, but like as long as we are that party of principle, then we should focus our efforts there. And this isn't to say like I don't think Greens should do green activism, but I think they should be libertarians. And I think we would actually all be more effective. For a while, actually, I was working on getting Cynthia McKinney as my running mate. And I think it would have been an amazing opportunity for a fusion ticket for 2020. And I would still love to see that happen. I have an incredible amount of respect for her. And she was on board with my platform, which was my campaign was purely platform driven, of taking the federal government apart and through a bankruptcy process to localize it down to the 50 states, where I'm not running for president. You give me the ring of power, I throw it in the fire, resign on day one, and take us through a peaceful, orderly, responsible bankruptcy process. John McAfee was on board with that. Cynthia McKinney was on board with that. And that's why, while in exile and grappling with this relationship with the LP in the process, John McAfee became my running mate. And because I was in a much better position, I was going to the debate. I was considered a top contender candidate throughout the campaign.
Do you think that there were a lot of people within the Libertarian Party who didn't want John to represent the party just because of maybe his personal antics and whatnot?
Yeah, but that's, like I said, normal factional silliness, divisiveness. There's an element of the Libertarian Party that just stylistically is opposed to anybody like that isn't sort of normie politician, and that's fine. I respectfully disagree strategically with that. But even me, like when I was running, I wore a suit and tie. I wore a black suit, white shirt, black tie. So it's like the anonymous uniform, and it's, a waiter's or chauffeur's outfit. I think that sends a certain message as well. But there are, so I felt like I was able to satisfy, people on both sides of that line, whereas John McAfee was more on the no, screw decorum side of things. And there will, and I think a lot of people use this divisiveness as infiltrators to create fault lines that aren't there, where we'd rather be unified and don't care that much about such superficial things like, does your candidate, have long hair and a beard or anything like that? Or is he John fucking McAfee? Is that a stylistic problem for you that he's going to tell it like it is, or that he's open about his drug use and sexual lifestyle? And if that's a problem for you, okay, I can respect that. But most libertarians would have said, oh, if John McAfee's the nominee, yeah, we'll get behind him like anybody else. And I think that was it's true about, the LP. You look at the two major parties in the United States, right? There was a huge chunk of the GOP that said, if Trump gets the nomination, we're out of here, right? And a huge chunk of the Dems that said, if Biden gets the nomination, we're out of here. And so, with the LP, there's that element as well.
So in regards to Jo Jorgensen, the nominee, just again, for my own education, was she sort of the candidate who the establishment liked, or was she like a compromise candidate between maybe different factions?
Yeah, I'm going to stay away from commenting on that out of respect for my friend Joe.
Okay.
At best, I'll just say this. I believe that she's entirely, I'll say this about Alex Jones as an example. When I call him controlled opposition, people go, what? He means what he says. That's not what controlled opposition means. Alex Jones got big on AM radio. The gatekeepers wanted him to get big, right? Somebody who could have controlled the process wanted Joe to get the nomination, right? Or maybe it was the result of some other influence. But
to be frank, and to put on my conspiracy theorist hat here a little bit, I see kind of similar trends where Jesse Ventura was interested. He submitted a letter of interest to the Green Party, and even months before that on the show actually said that he was interested in being the Green Party candidate. You have talked about running for president, or the possibility of you running for president, for years. Yeah. You've also, been supportive of people on both kind of the right and the left, the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. I know you've been supportive of. You've spoken fondly of Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich, Ralph Nader, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein. I think that it would be awesome if you were to run for president and seek the nomination of both the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. Is that something that might ever...
I don't think that could happen, because the Libertarians don't believe in climate change. That's what drove me away from them. That's why I went to the Green Party, because I believe that is the most important thing on the planet right now. And the Libertarians don't buy it.
So will you ever run for president? Will you seek the Green Party?
I don't know. You'll find out in the spring. Okay. Why would I do it now? Wait till the pikers are gone.
Okay. Well, Governor,
it's all about tactics, man. It's tactics. That's how you win. It ain't time now. It's too early.
I sincerely hope that you do run for president this year. And I think it would be awesome if you did.
Well, let me just leave you with this. What do you think about a ticket? Imagine this ticket. Governor Jesse Ventura and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
That sounds great. I would love to see that.
He quits the Democratic Party and joins me with the Greens.
Let's make it happen. Again, Jill Stein isn't running this year, so the Green Party is having a contentious.
Don't hold your breath, but it's far too early. You got to at least get in the year of the election before you worry about that stuff.
The Green Party of Alaska actually did end up nominating him, and Cynthia McKinney was his running mate in Alaska specifically. But I see that situation where they don't nominate Jesse Ventura, and they make sure, it was kind of a long, drawn-out process as to how and why, but it was pretty much ensured from the beginning that Howie Hawkins was going to be the nominee, whether anybody liked it or not. And I look at the Libertarian Party, where, similar to Jesse Ventura, John McAfee is this household name. I think that John McAfee in a lot of ways does embody sort of the spirit of the Libertarian Party, and you figure he would be a great candidate. But again, you ended up with somebody who, honestly, I had never heard of before. So, yeah, again, I just wonder how much that may have been planned and how much there may have been an effort to make sure that Donald Trump and Joe Biden were the only household names on the ballot in November.
The interests of those manipulating the Libertarian and Green parties and all other subversive activist movements throughout the world, and I mean subversive in the best way possible, subverting systems of injustice and profiteering, their interest is just to keep us weak and irrelevant. If you to reference COINTELPRO, their objective was not to murder activists. Their objective was to render the anti-war movement and Black Panther or Black Power movements irrelevant or incapable. And they achieved their goals. And, I hugely respect my brothers and sisters in the Green Party, because this is where we are on the same page, saying we're not just going to let the big injustices of the world go. We're not just going to go along because this is the way things are and this is the bigger team, and we're going to go with the Democrats or the Republicans or whatever, or be complacent. We are going to acknowledge the reality of this injustice in the world.
So again, just to get back to John specifically, I don't know if it may have been in the course of the campaign or not, but when is the last time that you spoke with him?
We did a number of interviews before, during, and after the 2020 campaign. I did not have any direct contact with him after he got locked up in October last year. And, before that, we were just, friendly colleagues, texting occasionally. So I can't remember when was the exact last time that we spoke, whether, where it is in that chronology, but I didn't have any, when he went to jail, I was actually, now I think of it, when I heard the news of his death, I was surprised how long it had been, and really, we haven't, I follow him on Twitter and keep up with him, just, as it comes there. But it was getting to that point where hey, hasn't John been in jail a while, Janice? Let's, his wife, who, I'm also friends with, and we've, functionally been in touch with, in all the political cooperation. But yeah, man, it was a real shock, because it was how come we haven't had movement on this since then? But I was just really looking forward to John coming back to, if he was going to lose the extradition. Remember, it was just like that: extradition, the decision, suicide, and no mention in any of the mainstream stories even that he had a chance for an appeal. That was conveniently left out. So I was just sort of looking forward to him, if he lost the process for extradition, that he would be back in the United States and I'd be covering his U.S. court case, and then we'd have a court building in the United States that we could go to, or we could organize protests and we could rally in support of John, and then we could hold our government in the United States accountable for what they were doing to John McAfee.
Again, you've been vocal that you do not believe that he committed suicide. I know that there was a lot of tweets that he put out saying specifically, "I am not going to commit suicide." He had a tattoo on his arm that said "whacked," and said that the meaning behind that was that he was not going to commit suicide, and even used the term Epstein, I believe, or said a la Epstein.
And the last thing he said to his wife the day that he was found was, "I love you. I'll see you later, or I'll talk to you later this evening."
John McAfee was not suicidal. I spoke with him a few hours before he was found dead. We spoke about the court's decision to extradite him to the U.S. It did not come as a surprise to either of us. We were prepared for that decision and had a plan of action already in place to appeal that decision. I blame the U.S. authorities for this tragedy. Because of these politically motivated charges against him, my husband is now dead. His last words to me were, "I love you and I will call you in the evening." Those words are not words of someone who is suicidal. All John wanted to do was spend his remaining years fishing and drinking. He did not deserve to die in a filthy prison like a caged animal. We knew that there would be an uphill battle to continue to fight this situation. But he's a fighter. He's always a fighter, and anybody that knows John, that knows him even a little bit, knows that about him. He would never quit this way. He would never take his life in this way. I don't believe he did this, and I will get answers. I want answers of how this was able to happen.
And if you knew him at all, I would stand proudly as a character witness to say there's no fucking way he killed himself in jail. He would have gladly given his last dying breath in American prison to know that he gave it fighting for what he believed in.
I think that one thing a lot of people wonder about, specifically because of Epstein, if you recall, the guards had fallen asleep and different cameras had short-circuited or whatever. Have you heard any details about that in regards to the circumstances in the prison regarding monitoring him?
I trust that Janice and the people she's working with will provide an adequate investigation from that perspective, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of that myself. But right now, it seems that and I want to try to connect this to the bigger picture, but first to really answer your question, it feels like, especially around me, with the death of Johnny Hurley in Colorado, with the death of John McAfee in Spain, with several people I know in the hospital under suspicious circumstances, with the FBI having visited my property 2 weeks ago, the things are kind of exploding in complexity. And I want to try to keep things simple. And I'm not particularly tempted to jump down the rabbit hole of the particulars in the circumstance of McAfee's death. I am comfortable with saying, yeah, I could be proven wrong, but 99% certainty he was murdered. He didn't commit suicide. They didn't. You say a man in your custody committed suicide, and he had a note in his pocket, and you're not going to immediately show us a picture of that note in today's age. You know, that should be everywhere. Anybody who wants to see John McAfee's suicide note right now should be able to see it. They're covering that up like they're covering up the death of the video and the footage and the circumstances of Johnny Hurley's death. There is a lot seemingly unraveling, perhaps spiraling out of control, perhaps an opportunity for us to push a little harder even. I see this connected to the George Floyd killing and the wake of that, which led to the realization of the potential of the technology of cell phones. Because now every cop, it took George Floyd. It didn't take the technology. It took George Floyd to put the idea in every cop's head. I could be recorded at any moment, and I can't control that footage. We can't have the department just steal and bury that security camera footage anymore. That's not a thing. No, you will be held accountable for your actions in this modern world by this technology because people are using it. And I just say this is a time when we need to use it more than ever to have these conversations, to push harder, to protect each other and look out for each other, because I think there's a great lessening of the brutality of the police state. If I want to say there's one amazing thing for us all to celebrate, a libertarian victory. When we say no victim, no crime, we see so many police reforms moving us in that direction very powerfully right now. It's a great thing to celebrate, but at the same time, there's a destabilization of the system that I sense that I'm very frightened of. I'm more than I normally am afraid for my own life doing what I do. And I would encourage everybody to, look out for each other. Visibility is safety. Promote people who are on the front lines, who are promoting a message that is of peace and love and harmony and nonviolence and the non-aggression principle, because that is the biggest threat to their system. So if I may, bring this back to some practical advice, I'm going to read the John Lennon quote that I have on my computer background here that I made myself. When it gets down to having to use, don't worry, I'm not going to try to do a British accent. When it gets down to having to use violence, then you are playing the system's game. The establishment will irritate you, pull your beard, flick your face to make you fight. because once they've got you violent, then they know how to handle you. The only thing they don't know how to handle is nonviolence and humor. And what a glorious side of the war to be on, where those are our greatest weapons.
Adam, I do just want to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I know that there are many people out there who may not be receptive to the suggestion that John was murdered or suicided. So one question I think that's out there is that, given the fact that he was so vocal about I'm not going to kill myself, I'm not going to kill myself if I die, it's the government. If you were the government and somebody's saying that, would you actually go kill them? Doesn't that immediately kind of raise suspicion and make people more suspicious of the state?
You're making a ridiculous suggestion that government is in any way rational. One of my favorite memes, it's got an x-axis and a y-axis, and the vertical axis is how much you trust government, and the horizontal axis is how much you've studied history. And then it's a slope going down that shows, gee, the more you study history, the less you trust government. And when you know the depths of the crimes that they have gotten away with, murdering, or as you say, suiciding as a verb very appropriately, a man who has said he would never do it, is not at all beyond their realm. But even if that's the case, it doesn't change any of my conclusions. That makes me slightly less afraid for my life, perhaps. But why did John McAfee kill himself if he killed himself? It wasn't because his life was going great. It's because he was in jail for doing the right thing. And that should scare all of us.
I did also want to ask you about this dead man switch that John spoke about on several occasions. And again, in regards to him saying that he's not going to kill himself, he also said that there were these, I believe it was 32 terabytes of information that would be released if he was murdered.
All right. So moving off of this, what effect will the detention have on your release of the 31 terabytes of incriminating data? Has this, or will it, activate the dead man switch?
No, it did not activate the dead man switch. I have a very complex dead man switch. I was neither dead nor permanently detained.
Okay.
And that data is the only thing that keeps me alive. The fact that I have it, and I'm still breathing, means that those people in the U.S. government and other governments around the world can breathe safely and sleep soundly because that data has not been released. If I am murdered, if I commit suicide, which is highly unlikely, I like my life, I love my wife, I love my circumstances, and I'm a happy motherfucker. If I do choose to commit suicide, you must know it was not suicide. Or if I disappear for more than a specific period of time without contacting specific people, then that data will be released. The fact that I'm not releasing it is the only reason I'm still breathing.
Do you think that actually does exist? Was that maybe just, John making, a threat that wasn't true? Or if it is true, or it might be true, when might we expect that to be released, or just how would you theorize it might be released?
Well, yeah, let me break down some overarching principles on this first. There are legitimate threats and illegitimate threats, right? If you come on my property and you're harassing me and my family, and I say get off my property or I'm going to forcibly remove you from my property, that's a legitimate defensive threat. You're threatening a defensive action, right? It's true about lies too, because I say, as a libertarian, my ethical standard is a world free of force and fraud and coercion. And so fraud would be deception, but in order to be unethical, it'd have to be aggressive and not defensive. It would have to not just distort your reality, but be depriving you of something that you have a right to. So if someone points a gun at you and says, give me your wallet, or I'm going to shoot you in the face, and you say, look, a bird, and there's a lie. That's a lie. There's no bird. You're just saying that to distract him. And so you can grab the gun out of his hand. That's a legitimate lie, right? And in that sense, whether it's true or not, I think John McAfee, to make such a public statement, is actually a brilliant measure of self-defense. I know from sources that I believe to be reliable that he did approach someone I know who declined to hold a dead man switch. And I imagine if he offered me, I might say, okay, but give me a private island and a lot of security, and then I'll hold this thing for you, because I don't want to get Epstein either. And there's a lot of suspicious timing around this. It might be that the reason they killed him now had nothing to do with the extradition, but that they killed enough of the kill switches that all right, we can kill John McAfee now and nothing's going to happen. And it's been a while now, and there are rumors of data trickling here and there and different things moving around the internet, but has the 31 terabytes come out yet? No. I don't think so. But in terms of someone in John McAfee's position saying that he has information that would make them less likely to murder him, hey, I'm all for that.
Well, Adam, I did have some other questions for you, but just before we get to that, I'm just wondering if you could just share any final thoughts that you have about John, maybe any memories, or just anything else that you'd like to say about the man.
Well, yeah, in terms of the temptation to jump down all these possibilities of conspiracy rabbit holes, let's stay focused on demanding transparency, calling out the criminals, because that's what John would have wanted. John was able to focus on what matters. And, like I said, I think of my own life right now as kind of exploding in complexity, or at least potential complexity. And, in honoring John's spirit, I will stay Zen. I will keep working out and eating right and spending time with my fur babies and people I love and enjoying this life. And I don't think John would want anybody to do anything different than that. But on top of that, what is your purpose? Once you've accomplished those fundamentals, I think there's a lot more that we can do in John's name in fighting in his case and fighting for the righteous things that he believed in and inspired us to fight harder for.
It's a good message. So again, I just have a couple other things that I wanted to speak with you about today, just because it's been so long since we last spoke. And one thing specifically that's been up and down, for a long time, but most recently is Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I believe, was up to about $70,000, I believe, earlier this year or thereabouts, and then it plummeted back down to around 30,000. So just wondering what your overall thoughts are on Bitcoin. Is there market manipulation going on? And if so, could you maybe describe what's happening?
Oh yeah, and I'm a huge fan. I've been a fan of crypto and Bitcoin from the beginning. I wish I could say I was as good of an investor as I was a promoter. I spent all my $5 Bitcoins on the Silk Road because I wanted to promote the market and the development, and long live Ross Ulbricht and his gift to humanity. The real Silk Road murder mystery has nothing to do with Ross Ulbricht. It's why did FBI agents want to shut down this site that was helping people get life-saving medicine to children in a safe and effective way, where sellers were accountable for their product in a way that had not been possible before because of the bullshit war on drugs. So I'm a huge fan, top to bottom. I know that there's going to be a lot of resistance. I think I'm a little more aware than most, if not of the numbers, of the dynamics of how the Federal Reserve System, the stock market, the federal government, Congress, all of the corporate intersections are working together to fight this, or to get in front of it, or make their own version of it, as you see different efforts at that. Of course, there's going to be market manipulation. And I would never say invest more in crypto than you can afford to lose, because it's not at that level of functional as a whole. And you can challenge me on this, and you can put the work in and invest here and cold storage there, but it's not at the level of stability yet where you can put more into it than you can afford to lose. I would say always have some, if you're asking me for investment advice, have some, I know you weren't, but I'll give it to you anyway. Have some buffer of metals, of physical assets, of gold and silver if you can. at least a rainy day fund. But I think everybody should be invested to some degree in crypto, to whatever you can afford to. And if you can't afford to put the time in to understand it, figure out a way to buy a chunk of Bitcoin, store it safely, and forget about it, and know that that is an investment in the future of humanity escaping fiat currency. So be a part of it. Use it, buy it, hold it. I support everything that gets people away from what is certainly understood as the foundational criminal racket of our time, which is fiat currencies. The biggest, baddest, of course, the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve System. So, I mean, they have killed people to maintain the power of the dollar. And when you understand how it works as a fiat currency, that is by declaration, by fiat, that the only thing really giving the U.S. dollar value, aside from the consensus, is that the U.S. government demands it by force and taxes. If you don't pay taxes in U.S. dollars, what happens? They steal your shit. That's the only thing that is really fundamentally undermining or underlying the value of the U.S. dollar. So it's a confidence game. It's a racket. It's how they steal value from hardworking people all over the world. It's how they make war against the will of the people who would never fund it if they were forced to see the bill directly. But when they can print money out of thin air or with the flick of a switch create it digitally, then they have the ability to rip you off without you even knowing about it. So the more we can educate people on this and inspire people to pursue alternatives in whatever they are, I support all alternatives to fiat currency. Well, all the way down to seashells and bubblegum wrappers as currency, if you're or monopoly money, whatever it is. I support all of it. I think crypto is an incredibly important, powerful way. And really, whether it's Bitcoin or some other altcoin, I don't pretend to know. I'm an agnostic on the Bitcoin maximalism debate. I support both sides of it, and I think everything we can do to promote crypto at this point is very critical to moving humanity forward.
I recently watched a debate that you had with Vosh. I'm not sure when it may have taken place, but you guys had a pretty lengthy debate, and there was one part where he was talking about two guys on an island, and if one had woke up after the other and collected all the coconuts and then demanded sexual favors for the other one to get coconuts to survive. During that exchange, you seemed to say that you believed in equal access to land and water.
Yeah.
And I just was wondering, in regards to that, wouldn't that kind of make you less of an ANCAP and more of like a geolibertarian, Georgist, mutualist?
Absolutely not. I don't think those terms apply. I don't care to differentiate too much. To me, I think this is all under the rubric of voluntarism with the foundation of self-ownership and property rights based on you own your body, and it's unethical to own another human being. And as human beings on this earth, we all have equitable rights to access to natural resources, just in the Lockean property rights sense. So I maintain that this still has a foundational ethics explanation through property rights, through voluntarism and self-ownership. And I wouldn't say that I have to be a geo-libertarian or a Georgian, or I'm not too familiar with those labels. Maybe people want to stretch those to fit what I'm saying. I just don't care to apply them to myself. I think what I'm saying is true to simple ethical voluntarism and self-ownership. And I would say in that example, as I think you would recall, that to claim that original ownership claim to all the coconuts on the island is not legitimate, because there has to be equitable access.
So I guess the point that he was trying to make there is in regards to the fact that the world today, there's great disparities in wealth, right? And I think that a lot of that may have actually been caused by the state, by imperial forces, obviously, especially in North America, right, that came in and drew these imaginary lines that weren't there before, and allocated resources to different people. And obviously, with the institution of slavery and whatnot, obviously that's created ramifications down the line. So because of what happened in the past and the misallocation of natural resources and whatnot, that has created disparities today where having a capitalist system may not make the most sense, because there's such huge disparities between
Okay, I got to interrupt because I was with you until you said the capitalist system as if it's what we have, because what we have is nowhere near any academically, intellectually honest definition of capitalism.
Okay, I understood, but again, like if we remove the state today, right? Like you wanted to, and localize and whatnot. I imagine that
disparities as a result of the aggressions of the past committed in the name of the state, and doesn't resolve that, certainly. That's why an important part of my platform was in the bankruptcy, returning all the land rather than to state governments, directly to the American people. So all the millions of acres, whatever it is, that the federal government claims to own, and we say, well, that's not legitimate. Who has a right to this? The people here. And at least I acknowledge certainly that this is a Gordian knot that you will never perfectly untangle. And what I'm suggesting is not perfect economic justice. I think that's a fantasy. But in terms of the most practical justice moving forward, because humanity is at the point now where it's more important for us to move forward and live in harmony and take care of each other and create systems that are sustainable than to pursue, like, even in pursuing crimes. I'm more about unitive justice and restorative justice than the fucked up legal system we have now, which is all punitive based. Not all, but primarily. It's a punishment based paradigm, not a justice based paradigm. So excuse me if that's too far off the point of your question.
Well, just so practically speaking, I think a news story broke recently that Bill Gates is buying up a bunch of farmland, right? Which is very suspicious. But in your ideal world, if we do start localizing and
I met Bill Gates in person. Not a fan.
Really? Where did you meet him in person?
Yeah, it's a weird story. Back to when I was a kid, actually. Friend of a parent's friend had a boat where he was in Seattle. I think it was like one of his lieutenants was having a birthday party on a boat in the same marina. And somehow I was a kid. I was like, I don't know, 12 years old. I was just like, oh, I could sneak in and shake Bill Gates' hand. And so I did. That's all there really is to the story.
So again, I recently saw a news story where he's, I guess, buying up a bunch of farmland, which again is very suspicious. But if we were to take apart the federal government, I believe that your plan involves going back to states initially, right, and then to more localized communities. What would happen to all of that farmland that Bill Gates owns?
I don't know. I don't have the perfect answer to that question. I would like to think that in the process of dismantling the federal government, one of the things I'm really looking forward to, for example, is giving all 562 native nations in this country that are at least recognized already the opportunity to declare sovereignty and to not be pushed into a new system where they fall under a state government if they choose to. Like, so any land that they can claim that's not developed, I would also like to be able to return to Native American tribes. And I think that's a reasonable goal within this bankruptcy process. If we're able to identify someone like Bill Gates who has a claim to massive land that's not being used, that they can't have a legitimate Lockean claim to ownership of in any real sense, I would like to say that it would be nice if we could incorporate that in the process and reclaim that as federal land for the purpose of giving back to the American people. But if not, then you would maintain ownership and would go to the states. So I don't want to make a promise that I can't keep procedurally here, but that's how that fits into my objectives here.
How about Donald Trump, for example? So he owns all kinds of properties all over the world, but all over the U.S. And he's a landlord. He rents this land to people that seemingly he personally acquired through fraud and whatnot. But even just going back to his family, over time, you could again trace it back to just the imperial conquest of the United States initially. So what would you say about Donald Trump? Does he have a right to be a landlord for all of these different plots of land all across the United States?
No. And I think the way that we decide what's fair and appropriate is through the process of localization and communities reclaiming property where they believe that If someone outside of that community is trying to claim some property in there, they should be able to judge whether or not that's a legitimate property rights claim.
Okay. Just personally speaking, I gotta say, you just in these answers sound it may be ANCAP, and maybe this is a failure of just labels overall, but it does seem very Georgist or mutualist. I don't know if are you familiar with Fred Fulbery, Geo-Libertarian?
No, and I'm kind of anti labeling within differentiating libertarianism. I think like there aren't enough of us to divide, So the Libertarian Party statement of principles is a very clear and beautiful expression of what I believe philosophically in terms of what I call voluntarism, the ethics of self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, the ideal of a voluntary society where there is no force, fraud, or aggression or any other kind of initiation of force. And the world that makes possible is a beautiful dream that I think if more people saw it, we would be compelled to create. And in terms of what we need to do now, what I'm trying to unite people on with this message of a presidential campaign, and I'm not running, but if the support is still there, I do plan to run again, it is to bring people together on a practical way to move forward on all the things we agree on, and at the same time provide the way forward mechanistically with localization that allows your government experience to immediately be more customized and less corrupt. And you go, well, shit, who's against that, right? And it's when government is down at the community level, that's my ultimate goal. I'm not an anarchist who says you can't have anything called government. If it's ethical, if it's voluntary, if it abides by the non-aggression principle, you can call it whatever you want. I don't care if it's a big government or a small government even. You could have, I even say, like, you can have socialism and communism at a local voluntary level as long as you're not forcing on anybody else outside of that community who doesn't want to be a part of that system. So even if your goal is something specific like that, we should be able to unite Americans on the failure of the federal government, that it's a fundamentally criminal institution, that is un-American, that is anti-American. And if you do the history, by the way, is the product of a coup against the Articles of Confederation. The system that we have today that authorizes intellectual property, taxation, standing armies, the fiat, all of these ridiculous bureaucratic things, these were not part of the original America that was under the Articles of Confederation that had the 13 original states much more autonomous. And it was a much more decentralized, localized phenomenon. The creation of the federal government as we know it was the product of evil men who wanted to force a new system in order to exploit it through standing armies and central banks. And they succeeded in that coup of 1789. And it's about time that we acknowledge that history for what it is. We see how it's relevant to the situation that we're in today. And we have a new American Revolution that again shows the world forward, the way forward in freedom, how we apply these ideals, because localization is not a uniquely American ideal. But we have seen the greatest perversion of centralization of government in the history of humanity, possibly through the American federal government as we know it today. And we have an incredible opportunity to, I think, once again, lead the world in freedom by saying, we don't need to be attached to this thing anymore. We're better off without it. We can see a way forward to a better world. And you know what? This applies to everybody. We can decentralize governments all over the world and transition to voluntary systems. I truly believe that more than any particular ideological vision that I have for the world that I want to live in or the community that I want to be a part of, that's the way forward for humanity.
Over the course of the last few years, I think we've seen an emergence of populism both on the right and the left. And this seems to come, against the trend that we saw in the earlier part of the decade or the end of the 2000s with, the Ron Paul movement and sort of the emergence of libertarianism, the Tea Party movement and whatnot that we saw then. although I understand that wasn't really perfectly libertarian. But I guess I'm just wondering, given the ascendancy of populism, both on the right and the left over recent years, do you think that the libertarian moment has passed, or at least has been paused, for the foreseeable future?
Not at all. The rise of populism, at least there as you describe it, is an expression of greater awareness of how criminal the current system is. And if anything, libertarianism is the ultimate populism. There's no greater power to the individual than saying you own yourself and no one can do anything to coerce you against your will ethically. Your right to self-ownership must be respected. That's the ultimate message of populism, to push the power down to the individual and say, no one else can rule over you in any way. We can be united globally as a whole human family to say that we recognize the universality of human rights that is behind this message. The achievement of the libertarian goal of a voluntary society isn't just happening and accelerating, particularly with what we are witnessing and experiencing now in the United States, and I dare say in mirrored trends throughout the world of a de-escalation of the brutality of the police state in the wake of George Floyd, represents a general ascension of humanity and a decrease in violence that is a part of a huge historical trend. I mean, I'm not just making this shit up, because, if you read the mainstream media, if you follow the news, you watch bleeds it leads kind of stuff, you might not realize that we are living in the most peaceful times in human history. And I cite the work of Steven Pinker, Harvard professor, did a great TED Talk, The Surprising Decline in Violence, based on his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, that proved, and you can disagree with his interpretations, but he proved irrefutably, academically, that not only are we living in the most peaceful times in human history, but that over human history, violence follows a pretty steady decline. And that is what libertarians want, is that nonviolent society, universal nonviolence. Non-aggression principle actually applied means a society of universal nonviolence, no coercion. Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And if you get stuck in this cyclical concept of human nature, you might be tempted to think it's hopeless. But as history rhymes and comes around every cycle, it is also a process of an ascending spiral. Humanity dances forward, maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, but by that count, we're in the middle of a major step backwards. We're about to come out of that I would describe as that of central bureaucratic governments based on the rip-off racket of fiat currencies. And we are coming now to 2 steps forward. And the human experience is accelerating. We are getting more capable, more aware every single day. We are realizing the potential of technology that we already had. And I see this as fundamentally connected to the love force behind life itself, where multi-celled organisms beat out single-celled organisms, and human societies that cooperate and get along and love each other and take care of each other and are based on respect for individual rights are going to outcompete societies that are always at war and in conflict and can't get along with each other. It's really that simple. Love conquers all, and this is the ascendancy of humanity. Whether it has the word libertarian moment or whatever attached to it, I don't really care. But no, barring the big obvious caveats of nuclear war or an asteroid or, a serious pandemic, the evolution of humanity to a voluntary society is inevitable.
Well, Adam, I really do appreciate you being back on the show today and discussing all these topics, as well as discussing John McAfee. Again, he was a former guest of the show as well, so he will be missed. For folks out there who would like to follow you, how can they do that? And also, do you have any projects that you'd like to let the listeners and viewers know about?
Well, I'll promote my book one more time. The one that I'm so proud of to have been, part, an influence on on the great John McAfee. By the way, I just realized this. He's actually listed. His name is in my book in the thank yous. Wow. Thanks for helping me make that connection today. I also recently started so anyway, my book, it's free, every digital format, including audiobook, at thefreedomline.com. I started a nonprofit recently to get vets alternative therapy access that they're being denied by government, called Homefront Battle Buddies, homefrontbattlebuddies.com. And I am still live Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific time at adamversustheman.com.
Well, Adam, thank you again for joining me today and discussing all these different topics. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully I can have you back at some point in the future.
Thanks again for the opportunity, brother.